All right, so we're talking today about Mary of Magdala. And as I researched Mary, honestly, it gave me so much courage because God loves and honors women. And so often we can be very confused about the woman's role God wants us to be. And yet the Bible, when I read it, makes me feel very valued and empowered. And I think we see in the story of Mary that she was indeed a woman who was able to feel valued and really empowered by Jesus. So first we're going to start with Luke chapter 8. This is where Mary Magdalene first appears. And can I have someone read Luke 8, 1 through 3? Anybody? Thank you.
Soon afterward, he went on through the cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing good news to the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their needs.
Great. This is really the introduction of Mary. And what it says here that we do know is that she was healed of 7 demons. Now, what does 7 mean? Could it be the biblical symbol of completeness? Was she just completely demonically possessed? Or did she literally have 7 demons? We don't know. But either way, it was bad. We know that. I have a daughter who suffers from mental illness, and I don't know if anyone of you share this, a mentally ill person in your family. At times, it can truly feel like mental, it can feel like demon possession. It was really hard. It's been the hardest time of our lives as parents dealing with that, right? And there were 2 suicide attempts when she was a teenager, over 4 hospitalizations. And we were told at one point she'd never be able to live outside of her house. And yet, 8 years later, she's been on her own, and she's working in New York in an Israeli restaurant, which is kind of cool. And even though she's obviously doing better, there's still the fear, the dreaded phone call. And when we do see each other, for 2 days after that, I'm depressed. Because I remember she really is ill. Like, I want to almost forget that she is, and then when I'm with her, she's ill. But I relate so much to the man in Luke chapter 9, verse 22, who brought his son to Jesus to heal him of his demon possession. Now, this boy had literally been possessed since he was a child. Can you imagine? And he often threw himself into the fire or the water. The demon was pushing him to do that so that he would kill himself. He came to Jesus, and when he saw Jesus and witnessed him, he started convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Can you imagine it? And yet Jesus healed him. When I think about Mary, we don't know when she got her demon possession. We don't know a whole lot about her background, but we know she must have suffered greatly. She must have been tormented. Do you ever feel like you have a demon inside of you that you're just trying to get rid of? Can you imagine literally having 7 all the time? What a nightmare. I wonder, did she freak the people out around her and isolate herself from everybody who loved her? There's actually no record, or actually, had she cut herself, even like Legion did? If you think about that, that's another thing. I mean, she was self-harming herself. But if you think about it, how in the world did Mary happen to come to Jesus? As Ed was sharing yesterday, when Legion knew that Jesus was coming, how did he feel? He was terrified. There is no record of any demon-possessed person who seeks Jesus out. In fact, they're repelled by Jesus. Demon-possessed people would do everything they can to stay far, far away from Jesus, the Son of God. And you think about this, someone must have brought Mary to Jesus. Maybe some trusted friend or loved one And the only other alternative is that Jesus himself sought her out. But Mary, in any case, could not have been seeking Jesus. Jesus found her. Isn't that beautiful? Before we start talking more about Mary, I want to talk about who she isn't, because there are a lot of misconceptions about her. In fact, she's probably one of the most misrepresented women in the Bible. So we're going to just kind of get some rumors, kind of like, what is it called? Rumors? What was that? That sounds great. We'll do that. All right. Okay, do you want to hear what the dictionary definition is of Magdalene? If you look it up, it is literally a reformed prostitute. That's what it has become when you look at today's dictionary. You think about the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, you know, the beautiful woman who's saying, I don't know how to love him, and her song is literally, I've had so many men before, you know, in very many ways, you're just one more. Unfortunately, they have the wrong Mary in mind, because Mary was never told, it was never told in the Bible that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, only that she was demon-possessed. So, it doesn't even line up chronologically, and sometimes she's equated with the Luke 7 woman who appointed Jesus, right? But she's not her, she was never a prostitute. In fact, it wasn't until 591 that Pope Gregory started the rumor. And as that rumor started, it became generally accepted by the Catholic community and therefore the Christian church. The other thing that she wasn't, I don't think I need to tell anyone here, she was not Jesus' girlfriend, right? She was not his lover, she was not his wife, or the mother of his child. Although even some of those rumors have been propagated up to this point in books and movies. And it's really actually disgusting to think about what rumors, you know, come out when we don't look at the Bible. And that's why we're going to look at the Bible. But we're going to see what Mary really was, okay? So we know what she wasn't. This is who Mary Magdalene was. She was one of the most significant women in the New Testament. In the New Testament, among the New Testament women, only Mary of Nazareth is mentioned more times. She appears in 9 different lists of women. In all but one, her name heads the list. So that shows kind of how prominent she was. Her name appears more often in the Bible than most of the 12 apostles. Isn't that something? We know that she was a loyal disciple. She was a trusted friend and a traveling companion of Jesus. We know later that she was an eyewitness to his death, to his burial, and the first eyewitness of his resurrection. And the first person to be commissioned by Jesus to proclaim the gospel. Isn't that exciting? And it's funny because she has a nickname, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but it's Apostle to the Apostles. She's the one that Jesus said, go tell the other guys, you know. She wasn't really an apostle, but I kind of like the idea of that. But we know that Mary was a vital part of Jesus' team. I think of Jesus having a little mission team. He picked his 12. And do you think the women who followed him were just random? I mean, I know that when he met Legion and he basically healed Legion of all his demons, Legion said, can I come with you, please? And what did Jesus say? No, sorry, I have different plans for you. Go to the Areopagus and preach all about me. But Mary was not rejected. She was actually invited along for the ride. Isn't that cool? And that was, I think, just as intentional as the choosing of the 12 apostles. Because Jesus does nothing that is not intentional. Think about it. But from a first century perspective, this is quite shocking. Because women led fairly sheltered lives in those days. They were separated in many ways from men in society. Men even avoided public encounters with women. And that's why, even in John 4 with the Samaritan woman, the disciples were so surprised to see Jesus talking to a woman. It was very unheard of in those days. Education was a male privilege. A father was able to teach his daughter if he chose to. But women never, ever studied under rabbis. Never. It was unheard of. Women had no voice in legal matters and were not considered credible witnesses in any court of law. Wow, that's the situation of the women in that time. So it was a radical thing for Jesus that he accepted Mary and all the other women that traveled with him as part of his inner circle. Can you imagine? So what was Mary's role? We're going to look at a couple of those ideas. I think the woman's role is still a question 2,000 years later, but maybe we can learn something from Jesus and Mary about the woman's role through Mary. We know that she was an Ezer. And you can read Genesis 2:18. Whoever gets there. Genesis 2:18. Thank you.
The Lord God said, "It is not good for a man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him."
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. Those were God's words early in creation, right? It is not good for men to be alone. Jesus and his disciples or his apostles were all men. It wasn't good for them to be alone. They needed help too, and that's okay. They needed partners, and they needed Ezers who could meet their needs. So what do you think this entailed? I mean, they traveled from town to town. They obviously were women who not only had the means to support, which says something about where they came from, right? But they also had the opportunity. I don't think many of them had small children running around at home, just kind of deserted them to follow Jesus. But also they had the heart to serve and to learn from Jesus. I imagine them feeding the apostles, the disciples, feeding them, providing clothing, maybe making sure they had enough blankets at night, But was that really their primary role? I think it looked like it kind of was, but from what I'm seeing, Jesus had another idea in mind. Not that those were not legitimate needs that needed to be met, but I think he had something else in mind. Because not only was she an Ezer, she was a disciple of Jesus. Can you imagine having the front row seats to Jesus' life and ministry? How cool is that? Talk about being a fly on the wall, right? She got to hear everything. She was able to soak in all of the teachings of Jesus and his discipling with his disciples. She learned from him day and night, right? And I believe that she and the other women were in earshot for a purpose. Could it be, and these are just conjectures, right? Could it be that Jesus chose this situation as a method for his training plan for women? He couldn't have done it a different way. He couldn't have called a woman as his apostle or as one of his disciples, one of the 12. It would be unheard of to do that. But he also didn't want them to be completely out of the picture. So he kept them within a distance and gave them such respect and enabled them to hear the very words that he was sharing with his trusted disciples. Isn't that amazing? We're going to see the three things that, the other question is, could it be that Jesus, with this entourage, which is including women, right, was modeling the family of God that we now see in the church? Mothers, fathers, sisters, mothers, everyone's essential to the kingdom. One of the things that we know, and the three things that stand out that we know that she did, one was she witnessed his death. Can someone read John 19:25? Thank you.
Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene.
Great. She was right there at the cross.
Yeah.
She also witnessed his burial. Matthew 27, 58 through 61. Is someone read that?
Say it again.
Matthew 27, 58 through 61. And then if someone else can turn to Mark 16, 1 and read that directly after.
I can read that.
Great, thank you.
58 to 61.
Yep.
Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb.
And Mark 16, 1.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, and Solomon bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body.
Okay, great, thank you. So she witnessed his burial as well. And even after his death, she continued to be his Ezra. If you think about it, she literally went to meet the needs of the dead Jesus. That's how much of a heart she had for her Lord. Now think about it, the death of Jesus, we know, had to be extremely disorienting for all of his disciples and followers. In fact, it was a nightmare. All that they had committed themselves to for several years just felt like it was a farce. I can't imagine how bewildered they must have been, and I think they were completely, I think they were just completely out of it. And yeah, because everything they'd given to seemed to have come to naught. Now, many fled, right? Some denied him. But what did Mary do? She stayed. She was literally there every step of the way. And it was not, that was a pretty daring thing for her. I mean, it was dangerous for anyone to say, I'm a disciple of Jesus. As much for women as men. And yet she never flinched. She stayed loyal to her Christ. And then the whole account of Jesus and Mary meeting each other in the tomb, I would love to read it. I can't because I can't get to my scripture here, but can someone read it? It's John 20, 1 through 18. Yeah.
1 through 18.
Yeah.
Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in the place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were standing. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her.
Amen. She was the first eyewitness of Jesus. How amazing is that? It's interesting because in Luke 24, Peter and the other apostle, who is most likely John, were also at the tomb, weren't they? And they were a little confused. It even says at one point that Peter pondered these things. He was just perplexed. He walked away. You know what? What if he had stayed? Do you know that if they had stayed, they very well may have been the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection? But they didn't. They just walked away kind of thinking about it. I mean, wouldn't it have made more sense that it would be Peter and John who witnessed Jesus the first time? I mean, really, when you think about it, the two greatest apostles. I mean, wouldn't that make the most sense? It would be more credible to everybody else, and you would think that would be Jesus' first choice. I don't know why, but they weren't his first choice. You know who his first choice was? Mary Magdalene. Isn't that phenomenal? So I just am blown away by the heart that Jesus had. It was not an accident. He chose Mary. And he also commissioned her to be the first to proclaim the gospel. And when I think of the lesson that Tess did the other day about Deborah, it's kind of a humbling situation when you can say, you know, we're going to do this, but it's going to be through the hands of a woman. You know, it's kind of like, ooh, like, you know what I'm saying? And I actually think that God had a purpose in it being a woman for whatever reason. Maybe these are the thoughts I have. Could it be that Jesus had allowed the humbling of the men at that moment, right, so that they would accept women more readily into their ministry and as credible witnesses also of the gospel? Isn't that kind of an interesting thought? Maybe to be more open to seeing their need for women as partners. Because they had the whole world to conquer, half of which are women, right? So could it just be the effective way to reach the world? That Jesus had this little idea all along of having these women there to kind of be there so that they could like start up the real kingdom here, men and women alike. It's interesting to note that the gospel writers, who were all men, didn't ever downplay the faithfulness of the women in contrast